How do we get people out of cults? This has been an ongoing debate for several weeks, considering the 7M dance TikTok cult that has entrapped Miranda Derrick inside of it and has created even more division between her and her family and has arguably pushed her further into the cult. People online have been debating, was the documentary the right choice? Was it the wrong choice? Are the parents in the wrong? Are the parents not in the wrong? What is really going on? And so today I want to share what the experts say is the best way to get loved ones out of a cult. My hope is that this video can be a resource for you if your family member or loved one is in a cult or in a DV situation, because they are very, very similar. So please sit back, relax, and take a deep breath. It's time to let the fresh air in. Hello, everyone. Welcome back, or welcome if you're brand new. My name is Erin, and I am fascinated by all things cults, true crime, and unique spiritual practices, and human behavior in general. So I like to post a few videos a week on one of these topics. So if you're interested in this stuff too, please consider subscribing. I would love to have you here. I also have a Patreon. So if you would like to be a financial supporter of the channel, there are multiple tiers you can check out. Different tiers get you different access to different fun things, so please check it out. It will be pinned in that comment down below. Without further ado, let's jump right into this video. I don't want to waste anyone's time. I want this video to be a great resource for you, and I am sourcing all of my information from cult experts, including the cult expert himself, Stephen Hassan. Now, when it comes to the Miranda Derrick situation, people are going back and forth. There's a lot of discourse online regarding who's really to blame, and a lot of conversation surrounding why is she the center of this group when there are other people who have way more traumatic stories. I think the answer to that question is that she's the most famous person. She's the face of the group at this point because we haven't even heard from Robert, right? So I've said before in previous videos that although I think it's a great idea to create more awareness about these dangerous groups, I 100% know that her family had the best intentions, and I 100% know that exposing these groups is vitally important. But specifically in Miranda's case, when it comes to her relationship with her family, I think it's very delicate, and I don't know if I can say with complete certainty that it was the quote unquote right choice for them to have made. I think them participating in the documentary was fantastic, although I don't believe Miranda actually watched the documentary. I don't think she was actually allowed to, because the documentary wasn't just about Miranda. We heard other incredibly heartbreaking stories. But I do think that her family publicly calling the group a cult back in 2022 in their live stream, it might have only further pushed Miranda into the group. And hopefully by the end of this video, you will understand why that is my educated opinion. Granted, I don't consider myself an expert. I am referring to the experts that I'm going to feature here today. So these are great resources for you. And I mentioned in my intro that they could pertain to DV situations as well. And that's because cults operate the same way an abusive partner operates. So whether or not you're in a cult or you have a friend in a questionable relationship that's causing concern, or you yourself find yourself in one, I hope this video can be a good resource for you when it comes to dealing with honestly any type of manipulative, narcissistic, abusive person. So let's jump right in. In order to fully understand how to get somebody out of a cult, we have to understand a little bit about how they got into it and how they got indoctrinated. If you are curious about a literal deep dive, like moment by moment breakdown of how someone could get involved in a cult. This is one of my first videos about it. I think it's a pretty good description of what that looks like. So please consider watching that video. It is about mostly Twin Flames universe, but the way people get into cults is incredibly, incredibly similar. We talk all the time when it comes to cults about brainwashing, indoctrination, what that manipulation looks like. But something we don't talk about a lot in a very public scale is the term undue influence. And I don't know if people really have a deep enough understanding of what this means. So I want to share with you Stephen Hassan's the literal cult expert. I want to share with you what he considers undue influence to be. According to freedomofmind.com, this is Stephen Hassan's website, undue influence is any act of persuasion that overcomes free will and judgment of another person. People can be unduly influenced by deception, flattery, trickery, coercion, hypnosis, and other techniques. In addition to religious cults, there are psychotherapy cults, political cults, commercial cults, organization, and rings. There are also personality cults, particularly if one person exudes undue influence over another or a small group of people, including a family. There are groups which combine all or some of these elements, especially when the group is large and has a variety of fronts or other entities. The cult, the meaning of undue influence. A destructive cult is a pyramid shaped authoritarian regime with a person or group of people that have dictatorial control. It uses deception to recruit new members and does not tell them what the group is, what the group actually believes, and what will be expected of them if they are to become members. It also uses undue influence to keep people dependent, obedient, and loyal. So, the goal of the cult is to use undue influence as a way to keep people dependent upon the cult or the cult leader, obedient to the cult or cult leader, and loyal to the cult or cult leader. And when it comes to Miranda Derrick, we are definitely seeing that. So, here's the destructive cult structure. You have your top leaders at the top of the pyramid, your sub leaders or inner circle, the people who might act as those like flying monkeys we talked about in my previous video. You have your core devotees, and then you have your rank and file members, with your fringe members kind of on the outside, people who are involved in the cult, but maybe aren't like fully indoctrinated in the cult, but still live a bit of a life outside the group. Assessing whether organizations exert undue influence. You can use the BITE model, which we've talked about in the past, but the BITE model means behavior control, information control, thought control, and emotional control. And this is a really quick way to identify if a group or organization is or is acting like a cult. If you can check off all those four boxes, most likely that group is a cult. You can also ask any of the questions below. Vague, evasive, deceptive, or manipulative answers to these questions are a huge red flag. Give yourself the time and space to investigate and think about any groups you are considering. Do independent research before you make commitments. Don't only rely on the recruiter's information, and don't let anyone put extreme pressure on you to make a quick, impulsive, or uninformed decision. So ask these questions before joining any group. Who is the leader? What are their background and qualifications? Do they have a criminal record, a legacy of allegations against them, or a history of misconduct? Do they have addictions to power, drugs, alcohol, sex, media, or shopping? Do they have emotional outbursts? Do they physically followers? Do they financially exploit followers by expecting them to live in poverty while they indulge in luxury? Do ordinary people find them inaccessible, unreachable, or elitist? And I think if you go back and watch my video from Friday, you'll be able to see that Robert Shin, in my opinion, checks off all of these boxes. Benign cult groups are any group of people who have a set of beliefs and rituals that are non mainstream. As long as people are freely able to join with informed consent, which includes full and honest disclosure of the group's doctrine and practices, and can choose to disaffiliate without shunning, fear, or harassment, then it is not a destructive cult. So there's your overview on how to identify a cult and what undue influence is. Basically, what we're seeing with Miranda Derrick, to use her as an example, is she is being at least influenced by Robert Shin to post what she's posting, to respond in the way that she's responding, and to blame her parents because he's latched on to that public idea that very few people have, honestly, that her parents are to blame for her involvement in the cult. He's latched on to that narrative and he is just consistently pushing that into Miranda's head. And now she is looking at her family as the enemy and the general public, these trolls, as the enemy, instead of actually seeing the destruction and harm that Robert Shin has caused in her life. Because all of this happened the moment she started being involved with the Shekinah Church and 7M films. So now that we understand a little bit more about undue influence, how people get indoctrinated into this group, and what kinds of questions we need to ask ourselves about a group before we join one, I want to help you understand or discover how you can help your loved one get out of a cult without creating further distance or pushing them into the cult even further. So, what should you do? Well, according to Stephen Hassan, continue to act naturally. Learn before you act, think before you speak, and adopt a curious yet concerned attitude with the person you suspect is in trouble. Don't get hysterical in front of the individual. Don't attack or confront. Don't ask them if they are in a cult or use the word cult at all. The word cult has such a specific meaning to it. And the second you accuse someone of being in a cult, they are going to assume a negative connotation with that word. And because they believe the group or organization that they have joined is a good group or organization, they believe in the group or organization, they're immediately going to get defensive. Because we hear from cult survivors all the time, people do not voluntarily join a cult. They join something that looks great on the outside. They join a good thing. And so for you to come in and say, you're in a cult, you're different, attack, 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 that is not the tactic that you should be using if you want to get your friend or loved one out of that cult. Calling it a cult to them or publicly saying something is a cult, it's only going to cause a war basically between the loved one that you still have in the cult and the cult itself versus you. And there's a tactic that all cults use. It's called an us versus them mentality, which basically means, and I'm sure you're already aware, but if there's someone out there that isn't aware, it basically creates this idea that everyone outside the group is the enemy. It's not just, oh, well, they don't believe what we believe, and that's okay. We can accept them for who they are. It's no, if people don't believe what we believe, they are the enemy. They will never understand you, and we're all better than them. We have bigger egos. We have more purpose. We are saving the world by converting more people to believers. Whatever the shtick is for whatever cult, right? We're more enlightened. There's this idea of being better than the people that are not involved in the cult. So when those people question the cult, there's this idea of, I'm better than you, A. And B, you're just trying to bring me down. You're just trying to get me down to your level. You are the enemy. You don't want me to be enlightened. You don't want me to succeed. You don't love God enough. That's the mentality that they're in the second you attack them and call them a cult. It's not going to create the result that you want. So, what Steven says to do is position yourself as a possible recruit and try to elicit as much information as possible. Ask questions in a friendly manner and insist on getting specific answers. Don't settle for global generalizations or evasions. Ask for any literature, but be cautious about attending meetings without being prepared first. Occasionally, we hear stories of people falling victim when they want to help someone else. If a group is legitimate, it will stand to scrutiny. Members will be forthcoming with verifiable information. They will not pressure people to make commitments before there is complete disclosure. They will not lie or use phobias to enslave new members. Now, I want to share with you some excerpts from a fantastic article that was written in The Conversation by Suzanne Newcomb. She did a fantastic write up of how to get someone out of a cult and kind of like what happens after they've gotten out of the cult. And I'm just going to read some excerpts, but I will leave links to all of these resources in the pinned comment down below so you have quick and easy access to them. So she says, if you're worried about someone you know who has joined a cult, what can you do to help? Mind your language. Intervention from an outsider can help protect someone from being further indoctrinated, but it is important to be careful about the wording you use in conversations. Research on people who have left high demand groups has shown that it can help to try to maintain positive contact. Do not shame or belittle the person. Be curious and do some research and ask questions about specific aspects of the group which might be concerning. Do not tell a person who is excited about their involvement in a new group that you believe they have been brainwashed or are in a cult. At this time in that person's journey, using language about cults usually makes them feel divided from society. Members are often warned that those outside the group cannot understand the convert's experiences. So it basically is creating that us versus them mentality. Oh, they're not going to understand what we're doing here. They're not there yet. They're not enlightened enough to understand. Labeling the group as an evil cult can entrench such a belief. Do your research. When joining a high demand religious group, there are usually pulls, things that are attractive about the group, as well as pushes, things that the person is trying to change about their life. Exploring and identifying these pulls and pushes can encourage people to engage in more active decision making and make them think about their own identity. Do some research about what exactly may be problematic about this particular group. It can be helpful to ask questions specific things group members are likely to encounter before the issues come up, such as, what if you were asked to not be in touch with your family ever again? Is that okay and ethical? How will they feel about you leaving their life? How much money do you think is reasonable to spend on this group? Could it be a good idea to safeguard savings or property just in case something changes within the group? These are really good questions and they're going to force decision making. They're going to spark that critical thinking in your loved one. You want to find ways to help your loved one crack that critical thinking open. Sarah Edmondson said in a recent interview, and I actually featured it in my most recent video as well, that when people would ask her questions, she would just say that, like, oh, those allegations are not real. Those allegations about Keith Raniere, they're not true. They're not true. And her friends might say, well, they can't all be fake. So what if just like 10% of what people are alleging is real? And she realized that if even parts of what people were alleging Keith Raniere was doing was true, she wasn't okay with it. And it helped her get out. It helped her really start recognizing that the group she was a part of was and could be very, very problematic. And this author goes right into encourage critical thinking. The use of thought terminating cliches, which are stock phrases that shut down critical thinking, are often used by groups, and they aim to align people's thinking with the group's dogma. For example, bad experiences or illnesses might be attributed to karma, or giving attention to physical and emotional needs might be labeled self cherishing or promoting ego. And I remember, actually, side note, when I was in the group that I was in, I am someone that's very anxious. I have diagnosed anxiety, and I remember my leader, I was expressing how often I'm socially anxious, and she said, "You're very self-involved. You're a very self-involved person. That's what anxiety is." And I remember it made me feel this big because I felt like I was a terrible person for being so self-involved. Like, oh my God, I'm selfish. I'm a terrible person. I'm only ever thinking about myself. That's why I'm anxious. And then when I unpack that and I'm like, well, no, I'm anxious because I don't want to affect this person negatively. I'm actually thinking about them. And I had to recognize that. That was one of the first moments where I started questioning what the leader was telling me. And then it was only a few weeks later that I really was like, oh, I'm in a cult. I need to break free of this. So it is these tiny little light bulbs that like randomly kind of turn on that help you realize, oh my gosh, I am in something I don't want to be in. I'm in something destructive. In some groups, there is constant questioning and reframing of members' experiences. This happened to me too. For example, questioning the decision of an authority figure might be deflected by an accusation that the member is demonstrating lack of faith or an order to meditate on your negative mind. We see this a lot in Twin Flames universe where you ask Jeff or Shalia a question and they're like, you should probably do the mirror exercise on that. If you don't believe in what we're telling you, you should probably reflect on why you're awful instead of them being like, yeah, what we say is bullshit. This kind of behavior can be understood as gaslighting, where someone is encouraged to not trust their own memory, their own thoughts and sensations, or even their own instincts, and can cause people to feel confused, physically ill, and doubting their sanity. We saw in the 7M docuseries where one of the Lee sisters, Priscilla, she said she would get abused and she would feel physically sick after every interaction, but she thought that was her penance. She thought that's what she deserved. Isn't that just so heartbreaking to hear? That's the story that I don't think Miranda got to see. I don't think she saw that far into the docuseries. It's so heartbreaking. So, questions like these offered above can encourage someone to consider other ways of thinking and tune into their own experiences and their own ethics more clearly. This helps people think more critically about explanations given by a group to justify harmful behavior and maintain contact with their own internal moral compass. If they're entrenched within the group, it is still worth trying to keep an open door. Even minimal contact at birthdays and Christmas can help people know there is a friendly person outside. A recent study of family members of cult members found that those who eventually left the group said close family bonds outside the group were important. Life afterwards. Experiences of leaving religious groups are complex and diverse. Some might physically distance themselves from a group, but maintain aspects of the worldview and even practices for long periods of time after leaving. One example is the Free Zone Scientology movement, made up of people who practice L. Ron Hubbard's techniques outside the structures of the Church of Scientology. In other cases, former members sometimes continue social contact with people in the group, particularly if they have close family members who are still involved. They might decide to never officially denounce the group, but nevertheless move quite far away from the group's way of seeing the world. Reestablishing social and financial footing after leaving a high control group is not easy. In the words of one recent study, extensive emotional effort is needed to create new social ties and a new understanding of self. And again, I'll leave a link to this fantastic article in the pinned comment down below. Now I want to transition over to another expert. She wrote a fantastic book called Take Back Your Life. It's all about being re-empowered once you leave a cult. Her name is Dr. Hyanya Lynch. She is fantastic. She has a great Instagram account if you want to check that out. And there are just a couple posts that I want to share with you. The first one is, former cult members need to realize that what was done to them was wrong. And in my opinion, Miranda Derrick needs to recognize that what is being done to her is wrong, and not from her family, but by Robert himself. They must be allowed and encouraged even to express appropriate moral outrage. The outrage will not magically eliminate the abuse and its effects, nor will it necessarily bring the victimizer to justice, but it will enable victims to assert their inner worth and their sense of right and wrong. Even implicitly demanding victims need to express moral outrage shifts the blame from victimizers to victims. And that's a direct excerpt from one of her book. Another excerpt is, just as fear is the backbone of cultic control, anger is the fuel of recovery. Anger is an extremely valuable tool in healing. It fortifies your sense of what is right by condemning the wrong that was done to you. It gives you the energy and will to get through the ordeal of getting your life back together. Anger can be a double edged sword, however. It can motivate healing or be turned inward against the self. Also, anger can be wrongly directed at innocent others. I feel like that's kind of what we're saying is Miranda's directing her anger towards her family instead of towards Robert and maybe even her husband. Sadly, there is the reality that we have to talk about, which is maybe you do all these things. You ask all the right questions, you maintain a positive line of communication, you try your very best to support your loved one who is still involved in a high control group while also trying to live your own life, and you're feeling like you can't say or share or express how you really feel about them being in this group because you're afraid of pushing them away. Stephen Hassan does have another approach called the strategic interactive approach. The strategic interactive approach encourages a positive, warm relationship between cult members and their families while helping to raise essential questions for cult members to consider. The SIA is non coercive and empowers individuals by giving them the tools they need to detect and remove undue influence from their own minds. The SIA relies on a dual identity model, the cult identity and the authentic identity. The strategic interactive approach liberates and then integrates the parts of the authentic identity that were co opted by the cult identity. The goal is to restore the creative, interdependent, authentic self and enable the individuals to digest and integrate their experience and become stronger from it. The SIA focuses on the development of healthy relationships with the family. The safe and nurturing environment created by the SIA offers many opportunities to heal old wounds. As an integral part of the family system, the cult member is automatically included in the process. The SIA provides long term recovery processes for both the cult member and the members of the family. Everyone is traumatized by the cult involvement, even those who are not directly involved. Feelings get hurt. Belief systems are assaulted or shifted. People lose sleep, they get depressed. Anger, frustration, and resentment are repressed. Each person who has been involved in the traumatic experience of having a loved one in a destructive cult needs support on psychological and emotional levels. The gentleness of the repeated mini interactions will help the relationships to become more honest, caring, and compassionate, setting the foundation for future interactions. It is an ongoing process that makes each telephone call, letter, and visit more effective. Focus on small, strategic, meaningful interactions that communicate unconditional love and provide space for the loved one to express doubts and fears. In some cases, a formal 3-day intervention is beneficial. Many times, mini interactions may make a formal intervention unnecessary. And that brings me to the final way to get someone out of a destructive high control group or relationship, and that is an actual intervention. And it would be my advice to not just have this intervention with loved ones, but to also have some kind of cult professional. And I know that you can schedule calls with either of the experts I've talked about today, but I know there are others who have a deeper understanding about the psychological impacts on cults. And it might be necessary for you to have a real intervention with your loved one, like Stephen has mentioned here. And if you do decide to do that, it is my belief that you'll have better outcomes if you hire a professional to come help you. Someone who at least has an understanding of cults and an understanding of psychology, who can lovingly support all of the complicated feelings and emotions and reactions that are definitely going to come up if you are in the middle of this intervention. If there's anything you get from this video, I hope it's this. Screaming at someone that they're in a cult is not going to save them from the cult. It's only going to make them get more defensive and push them farther into the cult. And in my opinion, that's what's happening here with Miranda Derrick. I don't even think it's because of her family. I think it's because of all the negative backlash she's been receiving, whether or not it was Robert creating false accounts himself to scare her. But these are tactics that we've seen in every cult I have covered. And one cult tactic that I've seen every leader use, from Scientology to Teal Swan to Twin Flames Universe, is these groups do not defend themselves. We haven't heard anything from Robert Shin. He's not defending himself, but he is going on the attack. He will sue people. He will make it look like it's Miranda's family's fault that she's in the situation that she's in. Miranda is placing blame on her family for what's going on. She is further separated from her family. It wouldn't be surprising to me if I learned that their relationship is incredibly strained. I mean, she's even expressed that it is incredibly strained. So please try to use these resources before you just go screaming at someone that they're in a cult or they're in a difficult, dangerous relationship. I know sometimes we want to use tough love with our loved ones. We want them to just like snap out of it. I mean, I've done that before with people I loved, not in regards to like cults or, DV situations, but just one example is just like wanting my friend to believe in themselves and like kind of like giving them a motivational speech about why they're a badass, and it's kind of tough lovey, but it's also inspiring. This is not that. It's far more delicate. We can't really use tough love in situations like this because we have to understand that the person who's involved in the group, their brain has been messed with. They have been meddled with. They've been reprogrammed. That's really what it is. So, in order to deprogram them, we can't just assault them with information and scream at them that they're in a cult. We have to lovingly ask questions so that their critical thinking turns on, so that they naturally put the pieces together themselves. I don't know if anyone would relate to this, but what's coming to me right now is sometimes I'll give my fiance like a piece of advice, and 6 months later, he'll be like, "Oh my gosh, my friend gave me this amazing piece of advice and I'm going to take it." And I have to be like, "Yeah, I told you that 6 months ago. Why can't you just listen to me the first time?" Well, sometimes people need that extra time. They need to hear it over and over and over again. All they need from you is for you to hand them the puzzle piece, and then they put the puzzle together in their head. But you throwing the whole puzzle at them and saying, "You're in a cult, put all the pieces back together," they're never going to be able to do that because there's too much information, too many pieces being thrown at them. So I really hope this video served you and can be a resource for you. And don't forget, all the resources I used for this video will be in the pinned comment down below, as well as a couple other links to fantastic websites if you're curious in furthering your education on this topic. Once again, thank you so, so much for joining me today. I usually only post 2 videos a week, but I'm trying to let Sundays be a little bit of a bonus episode where maybe I feature an interview with a psychologist or a cult survivor, or just make it an educational video like this. So let me know if you like this type of video, this style of format. But don't worry, those cult deep dives and analyses are going to still be coming at you. So please remember to subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you so much for spending a part of your weekend with me, and I hope you have a fantastic start to your week. Remember to stay safe out there, ask questions, and always stay skeptical. Until next time, bye.